The LiquaFusion is the first all-in-one 240mm liquid CPU cooler from Enermax with addressable RGB LEDs, allowing for unique lighting effects in the two fans and the water block. The block also has a clear panel with a flow indicator, and there's an inline high-efficiency ceramic bearing pump. If you're looking for a CPU cooling upgrade, click the LiquaFusion sponsor link in the video description.
Excellent!
What's up guys, welcome back to Paul's Hardware. I have an epic system build for you guys today, so I'm going to be putting together all the parts that you see here in front of me. This is a white theme build, mostly white I should say, a little bit of an RGB mixed in there too, but it was all conceptualized and based around this case, which actually arrived a month or two ago, but it's the Thermaltake View71 TG Snow. This is actually already launched in the black version. It is pretty much all white except for some tinted tempered glass windows, and I need a name for this build, so maybe something snow related or something white related, I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you guys have any epic names for this build. I was thinking of like Snow Blind or Snow Crash or Snow Demon, or maybe like It's Snow Big Deal. Could always just go with Snow White, but you might have Disney lawyers attacking me. Anyway, comments in the comment section. Let's start off by going over the rest of the parts for this build. So I actually want to start out with my choice for the graphics card, which is the MSI Titanium GeForce GTX 1070 Ti, which I chose because it has white LEDs and also a nice black and silver aesthetic, which I think will match really nicely with this case, as well as the overall remainder of the parts for the build. I do want to point out that this costs $500 retail right now, and if I was actually building a system with the focus on performance, I'd probably ditch some of the more expensive like RGB parts. Like the case, for example, is at least the black version costs $170 retail. It's currently selling for about $150 on Amazon. I've also got like, you know, a higher end 360mm radiator liquid cooler. I would probably ditch some of this higher end stuff to upgrade the graphics card to a GTX 1080 or a 1080 Ti before I invested in all that other stuff. That said, this is a build for my YouTube channel and it's got to look pretty, so that's the main reason I chose this, but consider a higher end GPU if you're actually considering putting this system together. I don't have a ton of RGB in this build, but the Team T-Force Delta memory kit here in white is going to be providing a decent amount of that. This is the Delta RGB version, and I got two kits here, 8 gigs per stick, so a total of 32 gigs. This is DDR4 3000 speed memory, and I've already used the black version of this in the build I did last month, so it looks really nice, especially when everything is set up. And I'm going to once again be pairing that with the Team T-Force Delta RGB SSDs. I got two of them this time, and these are the white versions now instead of the black version, so hopefully going to find a nice visible place to put those side by side, because these look pretty cool and adds a decent amount of bling to your storage setup. Actually, I had a difficult time finding an all-white motherboard. For example, there's a B360 motherboard from MSI that's all white with a white PCB and everything, but this is a higher-end build, and I just didn't feel right going with a B360 chipset. So I went with the Asus Prime Z370-A because it's got white accents on there. It's also a very solid all-around motherboard. Very good reviews and feedback, whether you're looking at Newegg or Amazon, and it only costs about $160. Now, since this is a high-end build on Intel's mainstream platform, that being LGA 1151 for the socket, Z370 for the chipset, but the new version of LGA 1151, I of course had to go with the i7 8700K. I guess I could have gone with the new 8086, but I don't have one of those, and I already had this one. It's my engineering sample, direct from Intel, so 6 cores, 12 threads, and a great choice, especially for a gaming PC. To keep the 8700K cool, we have the H150i Pro RGB from Corsair, their newest 360mm radiator all-in-one liquid cooler with the new Acetec pump block combo units. It's also got some RGB on that. I do also have the Thermaltake 360 rad version, but I thought with the black, white, silver theme, actually the block on this one I think will look a little bit nicer. And finally, for power, the old standby, the EVGA 750 G3 80 Plus Gold rated PSU. I'm once again using the sleeved cable kit that EVGA sells separately that you can buy for the 750 G3. They sell these for a lot of their power supply kits, but I think this will look a lot nicer than using the standard cables. It's also been somewhat pre-wired from the build I did last month, and I'm kind of lamenting that I don't have like a house set of all white cables, because I think that would actually look really nice in this build, but for the time being, this will work. So here's a first look at the unboxed View71 TG Snow. As you can see, pretty much all whites, some black accents like on the drive trays, the bit of mesh, there's some mesh behind this front tempered glass piece, as well as the fan and the grommets. But it also looks somewhat silver, and I think that's just because they have gray glass for the tempered glass panels. It's on the front, both sides, left and right side, as well as the top. Here's an interesting thing they've done for the front I/O. They've put little plugs in them, little plugs in the front I/O. But I/O is pretty standard. 2 USB 3.0, a couple USB 2.0, mic and headphone jack. Would of course love to see a USB Type-C up here, but can't get everything all the time. There is a reset button right here though, and then the power button is actually tucked in right over here. Side panels are held in place at the top front here and the bottom front here by some pretty hefty thumb screws. There's a rubberized spot right behind them, and then they swing out like so on hinges at the back. And of course you can lift them off if you need to. I should also mention that I'm always on the fence about what to do about the peely stuff here. I know you guys love the peeling of this off of all of the tempered glass pieces, but then whenever I do it, there's a bunch of people who say, no, you should leave it on until the build's finished, which is a more practical way of doing it. So here's one at least. I'm gonna peel that off. Oh yeah. Oh, it's gorgeous. All right, I had to get my fix. So after you move all these thumb screws, the big ones are for the side panels, the smaller ones are for the front and top panels, you can actually remove those tempered glass pieces, so that's not too difficult. It's also good that they've provided a decent amount of spacing here so that there's actually a decent amount of gap between the front and the top panel, and where air would need to either be exhausted or intaked? Sure, that's a word. And as reviews of the original View71 have proven, the airflow on this case is actually pretty decent. Now the front piece and the top piece are removed by the old school grab and yank method, so just grab with the back and pull and you can lift that top piece off. I initially thought this dust filter underneath was a little bit janky, but I did find out it's magnetized and it's flexible, and it's got these little tabs along there as well. So if you tuck the magnetized part up underneath the tabs, you can get it to rest in there with a fair amount of stability and sturdiness. So I wouldn't call it the most user-friendly dust filter, but I'd much rather that it is there than not there. You got a similar situation on the front panel here, and they have actually added metal strips to the plastic frame so that the magnets on the dust filter will attach and get you a reasonable situation to work with here when it comes to dust filtration. Beyond that, for radiator support, you're pretty well set up. With the View71, you can do 360 or 420 millimeter radiators at the top, and this bracket is removable with 4 thumb screws, 2 at the back and 2 at the front. And you get the same radiator support for the front intake here, although that bracket is not removable. Behind that, you have some drive cages here. They've included 2 of them with 4 actual 3.5-inch drive trays. And these are pretty standard, somewhat flexible plastic mounts that you can pull out to slot your 3.5-inch or 2.5-inch drive into and then replace like so. Behind that, the main motherboard tray has some black rubber grommets for routing your cables through. In this case, does have support for the somewhat ubiquitous now vertical GPU mount with a 2-slot attachment point there at the back, and they've even included a bracket to help prevent sag on that GPU. What they have not included though in the accessories, which are right here, is an actual PCI Express extension. So that will be sold separately if you need it. Thermaltake does sell those, including very long ones, so that's an option. But since I don't have that, I'm going to be removing that bracket and just going with the standard GPU mount. Down here at the bottom, you've got another intake you could possibly mount a couple 120 millimeter fans for. Then there's a full-length dust filter that you can pull out from the back that will provide dust filtration, not just for the power supply, but also for that intake at the bottom. And then around here on the back of the case, we can see there is plenty of space back here for cable management, so I approve of that. And there's a couple removable trays, actually, one here and then a couple over here. These actually have 2.5-inch mounts on there, so you can add a bunch of 2.5-inch drives, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 on top of whatever you might be able to fit in the cages out front. These panels actually are removable, and that will provide you access to the back of this rail system. And if you do want to remove those drive cages, which are held on by Phillips head screws, you can do that. And then there's some various mounting points here for pumps, radiators, or reservoirs. And I believe these panels provide a secondary function of giving you a little bit of a way to hide your cables, since this does have tempered glass on both sides. By putting that there and then feeding all of your cables up to maybe one of these pass-throughs, you could potentially hide some of that. So my first impressions would be, it seems like a pretty solid layout for the case. I'm not the hugest fan of the dust filtration here, but I am appreciative that it is there at least, and that you can remove these internal magnetic filters from the panels themselves. But if you are going to do your dust filters like this, I suppose it is good that these entire panels are pretty easy to remove, and they don't conflict with the front I/O. So you can pop those off to clean them without necessarily messing with anything else when it comes to wiring in your case. The one final critique I have is the printing here, actually up on the front I/O. It's just a little sloppy. It's not as clean as I feel like it should be. So Thermaltake, that's maybe somewhere you could improve on in the future. First I couldn't figure out what these little rubberized pieces were in the accessory kit. Then I realized, oh, they're actually the standoff feet for the power supply. I'm not sure if this is how it's going to ship or if it's just because I got a pretty early sample of this, but remember to install these before you install your power supply. The build is coming along. I've decided to go with pretty much all white LED fans here. So it ships, the case ships with 240mm white LED Thermaltake fans. I tried to kind of space them out a little bit for aesthetics while still providing plenty of front air intake. For the rest of the fans in the case, I've gone with these Corsair maglev fans. These have white LEDs in them. I've actually had these around for a while and I just realized I had enough of them to do this job. So I replaced the fans that shipped with the H150i Pro with these maglev fans, and they have a central white LED hub. So I think that'll look pretty cool. Add one back here for exhaust as well to provide some more uniformity in the case. And then a couple more changes. For one, Joe noticed that the SSD mount tray here that we had mounted these two behind the motherboard tray is the same exact configuration as the two that are back here. Now it doesn't seem like there's a native front-facing SSD mount if you have fancy RGB LED SSDs like ours, but we did discover that if you're willing to provide a little bit of force and just a tiny bit of flex on the steel frame, you can swap this around to this side and still get it to mount. Again, it takes a little bit of pressure to do that, but this will give us the ability to mount our SSDs on the front here, and it will also provide me an excuse with doing not as good of a cable management job in the back, because now I don't need to show you guys the backside with the SSDs mounted. We did flip them 180 degrees so that they be facing the right direction, and the SATA power and data cables are going to be on this side. Unfortunately, I don't have any good pass-through right here, so I'm either going to have to bring those over to this grommet or possibly go down to here. Oh, and one other thing, the bracket for our radiator mount up here at the top can actually be shifted. There's holes, not just where it's at, but actually two shifted up that way. And I think even though we have plenty of clearance up here with our single push configuration, I think I'm gonna shift this up a little bit just to move it away from the motherboard and make things a little bit more spaced out. All right guys, all of the major components are installed and I spent a reasonable amount of time doing cable management on here just to show you guys really quick. Look at that, huh? Yeah, it's not bad, okay. More to the point though, it's time for our first inaugural test boot. So without further ado, things are looking up. Two of our maglev fans aren't, the SSDs aren't lit. We got T-Force RGBs though. And I think probably during the cable management back here, I disconnected those. Oh.
What are those?
Really, Thermaltake? Oh, this is a faux pas right here. I don't know how I feel about this. Alright, I kinda got it. It's extra tempered glass sticker here with ghetto adhesive that does not want to come off cleanly. At least not without a perfect slow peel. I'm gonna have to clean up that bit in the corner. So I was able to troubleshoot the problem with the fans. There was just one fan that was not connected up at the top here. I had the plug slightly off there. And then the one that was coming down to the bottom, I actually had two splitters off of this bottom plug running the front two fans, as well as one of the top fans from the radiator. So I just switched those splitters around and replugged them in. And then everything lit up and it was looking very pretty, except for the SSDs. What I forgot completely as I was setting up the parts for this build is that the SSDs use addressable RGBs, the 5-volt 3-pin plugs. This motherboard does not have that connector. Fortunately, I have a few random RGB LED things hanging around, such as little individual control boxes. So I tried a couple different ones, and I ended up using one of the Cooler Master ones. So that's plugged in back there via SATA, and that one actually has some controls on it. So I was able to cycle through and get us an appealing RGB blend on our front SSDs. And that was really necessary because it wouldn't really do to just have them off. But now they're lit up and you can get a bit more appreciation of the RGB. Speaking of RGB, doing the white LEDs with the case fans and then having a little bit of RGB in the system itself, I'm still kind of on the fence about. One thing it's definitely shown to me is that white LEDs are not always white, especially if it's an RGB LED, like the LED on the side of this graphics card, for example, is RGB, whereas the fans are just white. But even the all white LEDs in the case, like the white LEDs on the front Thermaltake fans and the white LEDs on the top maglev fans from Corsair, are not exactly matching up. So here's an example of why you might want to sort of veer towards a single source for all of your lighting needs. Thermaltake, for example, has a pretty wide array of RGB fans and an entire ecosystem with software they've developed around that. I was just kind of using stuff that I had on hand, as well as just a few of the parts that were sent specifically for this build. But all that said, I think things are still looking pretty nice here, and I think that's because the white sort of ties everything together. Whether you're talking about the black, the silver, or the red, green, and blue colorful LEDs, or the white LEDs. So guys, I will put the links to the parts that I've used in this build down in the description, but one final warning to you guys if you didn't catch it at the beginning. I do not recommend building this system as is without giving some consideration to an upgrade on the graphics card, because that is a core component that will give you more performance versus a lot of the other stuff that's integrated into this build, which is a lot more for aesthetics. And I usually go for performance before aesthetics. So consider a 1080 or a 1080 Ti before you invest in everything else. That's all for this video though, guys, so definitely hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed it, and of course check the description once again for links to all the parts I used, as well as a link to my store where you can support me by buying shirts, mugs, pint glasses, or other useful stuff. Thanks again so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.